Hello and welcome to One Trek Mind. I'm Michael.
And I'm Raptor.
And today we are going to be discussing the two-part season premiere of Star Trek Discovery. First, we're going to kind of run down through the basic plot points of each episode before we dig into our own opinions and feelings about it as a whole. So let us begin. We start the premiere right in the action, which for Discovery, pretty par for the course. We
start as we mean to go on, yes.
But then they immediately jump into this Starfleet 1,000-year anniversary party. There's a little bit of setup with some characters in terms of their relationship dynamics, and then they immediately set up the Red Directive, main plot line going on, which they reveal in a place called the Infinity Room, which we will discuss a little bit more later because that was a little surprising to me.
So yeah, in the Infinity Room, Mr. G-Man, Dr. Kovic, who's the guy I'm still convinced is like Section 31 or something, reveals that they need to go and get some MacGuffin from a next generation era Romulan scout ship, which is the first of a great many next generation references in both of these first few episodes. Because some classify this is like a hyper classified mission, and Discovery goes off to go and collect it because someone else is after it, and we see our two main antagonists for this season are revealed as already being on the Romulan ship before Discovery gets there, and having already gathered the item.
It's Maul and Locke, who
yes.
seem like interesting characters. Again, we'll dive a little deeper after the breakdown of the plot points here.
Michael Burnham and a away team beams onto the Romulan ship, and this serves as a hook for the action sequence that has already been given away in the trailer. Basically, Michael Burnham fails to stop the antagonists, gets sucked out of the ship, and then sticks herself onto the ship while it's at warp, and we have this warp chase scene where she is trying to disable them, but it doesn't really succeed. And basically, because of Michael Burnham's actions, they lose the bad guys, and Dr. Kovic, Mr. G-Man, is not very happy, and she has to go and get Booker to help.
Yes, they sent off a whole bunch of random warp signatures so that they couldn't follow, which I actually did think was kind of a clever little idea there. Mm-hmm. I wondered what all those things shooting off were, and then when they explained it, I was like, oh, that's actually kind of smart of them. From there, they narrow down where they have gone to, some desert planet. I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head.
Kamal.
Which does look an awful like Tatooine. Some definite similarities there.
It's basically Tatooine and everything but name.
But they get there, or we actually see our antagonists get there first, and they meet up with a Soong-style android named Fred, which I love that name. I like how they played into that in the episode as well. They constantly would refer to him as Fred. And he very quickly opens this Romulan puzzle box to get, the first puzzle piece of this treasure hunt that they're on in this season. And then they immediately proceed to kill Fred, which I took a little bit of issue with. Again, we'll discuss later. And from there, our hero characters, Michael, Book, and the new Captain Raynor, show up and immediately give chase, which leads into the next, big action sequence of the episode where they're on these sand runners, I think they called them. It's basically just a bike chase through the desert, which lasted a very long time. Again, we'll get into it on our thoughts about it, but it did last quite a while and resulted in a catastrophic avalanche that the two hero ships combined are able to stop and save the town from.
Which is a scene we have many problems with.
Yes, again, we will jump into that. after the breakdown.
While they've been engaging in this Star Wars-esque Sandrunner chase, which doesn't have flying stormtroopers in this time, we see that Tilly back at Starfleet HQ is hacking into the Federation database in order to get to the bottom of exactly what Dr. Kovich is after. She almost gets caught, but then our Principal Admiral, whose name I still don't know,
I don't know.
Our Principal Admiral saves her and agrees that it's important to know what this is all about. So it turns out that a Romulan who was part of the away team from the Next Generation episode The Chase, where the Cardassians, the Federation, the Klingons, and the Romulans all discover that they are related to the actions of a single race, the progenitors, who seeded the galaxy thousands and thousands of years ago. And the Romulan who was responsible for carrying this puzzle box and which had this diary inside it, was part of that away team, and apparently has discovered some sort of progenitor technology, possibly the technology of how they seeded the galaxy all those millennia ago. This is the MacGuffin that Discovery is after, and our antagonists Maul and Locke are after, because obviously in some respects it very much reminds me of the Genesis device. We know that it can create life, but it can also probably destroy life as well.
It can probably do some pretty horrific things, which they say as much. They're like, this kind of technology in the wrong hands could cause a lot of damage, which it certainly could.
And then that's basically episode 1. And then episode 2 starts off with ostensibly this court-martial scene over the events that occurred on Kumail, with Michael Burnham and Captain Rayner basically getting their asses kicked over the fact that they almost got thousands of people killed in this rocky avalanche.
Well, they seem to only be after Rayner in this scene. They frequently ask Michael, like, did you agree with it? I know you didn't. And they're basically putting Rayner down, propping Michael up, and I think Michael was right in that moment, so I think it was a justified action on their part. But yes, they seem to really be gunning after Rayner.
And much of the second episode is essentially Michael and Saru being on this jungle planet where they believe the next clue is. It turns out it's a Promelian burial planet, as again another reference to the Next Generation with the Promelians. And it's quite a bit of a slower paced, kind of almost compartmentalized episode, because there's a lot of Saru and Michael talking, and Saru and Michael dealing with the dangers on the planet. Michael and Saru have to deal with a security device on the planet. Basically, at one point, Captain Rayner, Tilly, and Adira on the ship help them out with this drone problem, and at the same time, also Book tries to talk to the bad guys on this Dark Comms.
Yes. From there, it seems like you get a little bit of insight into the relationship between Locke and Maul, as well as the somewhat vague relationship between Booker and Maul, which, again, we'll dive a little deeper into in a bit. Saru and Michael come across this pillar or obelisk that has another riddle on it for them, another clue as to where they need to go. The force field, or the electromagnetic field, starts to power up again, so they're scrapped for time. They manage to get the last little bit of the clue, as well as a piece to apparently what is a map toward the final bit of this treasure hunt. And then back on the ship, Discovery is where they again make the revelation that this piece that they found is actually part of a map. They have 4 more pieces to gather, so we know that at the very least 4 episodes are going to be dedicated to finding some of these pieces. As well as this, you get the revelation that Booker is at least loosely related to Maul, and he knew of her when she was a child, but apparently never met her, only saw a holographic image. Again, not too sure how they're going to play into that, but we will discuss in a moment. And then they conclude the episode with Michael speaking with the Admiral first, finding out that Raynor has been given an early retirement for being like such a reckless, trigger-happy captain in this time of peace and diplomacy. Right before Michael recruits him as her new number one, now that Saru has said his goodbyes and accepted his ambassador position with the president. And those are the major plot points of the first 2 episodes. Now let's start breaking them down a bit.
Shall we start with what was good about them to begin with?
Yes. I will say right off the bat, my general thoughts on these 2 episodes were pretty solid start. I'm kind of digging it. That being said, there are a few key moments that do bother me, but again, we'll go into the good first and discuss what could have definitely been improved after. Right away, I loved the opening scene after the action set piece, and they do go 4 hours before, where you see all the characters at this party being people. It was nice to see them all just talking to each other and making jokes and seeing how their relationships have evolved from the beginning to where they're at now. It was nice to see Tilly in there. It seems like she is going to be in this season more than I had expected. It seemed like they definitely wrote her off in the last season, but are seemingly bringing her back into the fold with this, which I am perfectly happy with. I actually do really like Tilly's character. And we also get such a lovely little scene with Saru and his love. I actually really like any scene with those two. It's so cute.
It is. I mean, I also really liked the bar scene that basically the first episode starts with. It's nice to see there's obviously some tensions here. That there seems to be a couple of plot threads which are going to be a thing throughout the season. Stamets is thinking about his legacy because the Spore Drive program has basically been discontinued now, and he's kind of gutted about that, and he's kind of seems to be pondering what his legacy is therefore going to be in the future. Tilly, both in this episode and the second episode, she seems to be discovering that teaching, and as someone who is also a trained teacher himself, teaching is a bloody difficult job, and it is not easy to get students to grasp what you're trying to teach them. And that does seem to be something she is struggling with. And yes, seeing Saru with his Vulcan love dancing, Saru talking about becoming an ambassador, and them having the relationship conversation about it. She also name drops the Tholian Republic and the Breen Imperium. Nice little name dropping their references.
Good little Easter eggs.
I wouldn't mind seeing the Tholians if they're in the future of the episode.
Yeah, show the Tholians, forget the Breen, they suck.
It was a really good start. For once, the show felt like an ensemble show. This felt like it could have been in 10 Forward or Voyager's Mess Hall. It felt like normal Star Trek.
It did. And again, I've always been one to say I appreciate that Discovery and other new modern Treks try to break the mold a little bit, not do just the same thing over and over again. I have always appreciated at least the attempts at doing that. But it is really nice to get back to form, seeing just your characters being characters. They're all a part of a crew, they're a family together, so let's actually see some of that. And here we actually got to see some of it, which was nice. But they immediately jump into the Infinity Room, which... Did anyone else think that looked just like The Matrix? I thought it was a little bit of a ripoff. I guess you can't say a blank white space is a ripoff, it's just a blank white space, but as soon as they were in there, I was like, oh, it's like Neo and Morpheus, discussing their next move.
I mean, it also completely reminded me of scenes from any of the Half-Life games where the G-Man zaps you into some just black area. And considering Dr. Kovic himself just reminds me so much of the G-Man in his looks, his mannerisms, his specs. He's just... I am glad that the first episode really did make him seem very shady and somewhat of a concern, because I don't trust him at all.
Again, my concerns have been mostly quelled with the end of the episode where he does reveal to her what's going on, and I was like, I don't think he's gonna be a villain. I don't think so. He could. Who knows? Maybe he's a progenitor. Who fucking knows? But, yeah. I mostly liked the scene just for the sake of it cut out a lot of the fluff that I feel a lot of Discovery has an issue with, where they just take forever to, like, get going with things. Here, just maybe 5-6 minutes into the episode, they're like, red directive, let's go. You don't know what's going on. It's a mystery, as all serialized TV is. It's a bit of a mystery box, which can be a good and a bad thing. And here I like that very quickly we get sent out on the mission. We're not wasting too terribly much time with it all, which I suppose they can't afford considering it's going to be their shortest season out of all of them, which I think ultimately will probably improve the story as a whole. There's a lot of seasons that just drag and drag and drag, so condensing it's probably a good idea.
And then we get this lovely reference, again, the 24th century Romulan scout ship, which we saw a couple of times in the Next Gen episodes.
Nice to see it in 4K.
It's also a starship that ends up also being redressed and becoming other starships throughout Deep Space Nine and Voyager, as inevitably they all did. It was nice to see it. And the two bad guys are very obviously together. There's definitely some romantic relationship going on between them.
Mm-hmm. Which I like that as well. I like the Bonnie and Clyde element that the two of them have. There's still not a lot we know about the two characters, but from what we have seen, they feel like appropriate villains. They clearly are willing to kill people in order to get what they need done. But they even at one point expressly say in the episode, I don't remember if it was the first or second, but they don't just indiscriminately kill people. They're not just evil people. They clearly have some sort of ultimate goal and plan here. And they're not sadistically hurting people or trying to one-up the Discovery crew because of some sort of vendetta. It's clear that they like to have some fun and a little bit of style when they're doing their nefarious deeds, but they don't seem like mustache-twirly evil villains, at least not yet, so I do like that. I think thus far they are interesting. Particularly Locke, because one, we don't know really anything about him, and his very first appearance where has translucent skin and his face kind of morphs into the way you normally see it, that gave me a lot of questions that I hope they do answer at some point. I'm like, what is he? What species is he? On that note, what species is Captain Raynor? I cannot pinpoint those ears to save my life. What are you, dude?
But yeah, we then both had quite a... I want to say nitpicks, because they probably are nitpicks in the wider scope, but I want to get back to this in a little bit.
Oh, I have one in here that's not a nitpick. I have one slight plot issue I had with this scene, but I'll let you go first.
So, Michael Burnham beams on with a standard away team, including Awushi-kun, if I'm not mistaken.
Awushi-kun and Reese. Two characters that I do like, and I really wish I could see them do more, and this was not the episode to give it to me.
Yes. They beam aboard. I mean, again, the captain really shouldn't be going and putting herself in danger in this situation, but we'll let that pass.
Again, as I said, since it's a red directive, I think they do get a kind of a pass through this whole season on that one, just because, again, with the Omega directive and Janeway, she very clearly took front and center stage in that moment, even told people, don't go to your stations, I'll take care of it. Because it is such a high priority, high secret mission. So I can accept Michael being the one to constantly be on the away teams for this season. It's a little tainted from all the previous seasons, and she's on all those away missions as well, but, what can you do?
Yes, but the problem that I think both me and you have with this is what happens immediately upon discovering the bad guys.
Yeah.
After a short conversation, the bad guys use these force-filled bubble guns to disable Awushi-kun and Reese. Now, it's a wonderful idea. I absolutely love the idea. I think it's a great sort of weapon to have. The problem I think we both have with it is it once again therefore takes all of the action scene and puts it entirely on Michael Burnham's shoulders, because from this point onwards, the fact that Wushikun and Reese came with her is worthless. She goes after them herself, she gets sucked out of the ship, she sticks herself to the outside of the ship going at warp, and then we have this kind of over-the-top scene of the ships at warp. And again, it's not the first time we've seen people on the outside of ships at warp. We saw it in Enterprise. You know, she has this conversation with Captain Rayner telling him to let them go, to disable his tractor beam. Discovery ends up chasing them as well, and somehow just the act of tailing the two other ships makes Discovery start taking damage, which made no sense to me.
Yeah, I didn't understand that.
We've seen starships chase other starships at warp in Star Trek before. It's fine, you know.
I mean, I'm assuming they're saying the degrading warp bubble is what was causing damage to all the ships, but I'm like,
They all have their own warp bubbles, so again, that doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, I'm like, it seems weird that the bridge is sparking and smoking just because they're at warp near someone. It was a little weird. It felt like it was arbitrarily bumping up the tension, like, oh look, the ship's taking damage. Why? No one knows. I could not tell you.
And then eventually Captain Rayner is convinced by Michael Burnham to let them go, and then they escape and she's floating in space and just about gets picked up by Discovery before she becomes a bug on a windshield. But the whole thing is just so... I mean, like I said to you when we were watching it, it's very j.j.abrams-y. It's the sort of thing he would do and has done similar sorts of things in his films. You know, it's very cool. All these ideas are very cool. Let's have someone stuck on the ship at warp, and let's have the force-filled bubble guns. Brilliant ideas, but they're just so over the top that I don't want to say that it's not Star Trek, but it certainly did make me roll my eyes because it was just so excessively over the top.
I mean, I didn't really mind the over-the-top aspect of it. It's not really following the rules, I guess. Because again, there are a few ways it's not following the rules. One, as soon as Michael is out of that warp bubble, and they're still at warp, she'd be dead. Like, I'm sure you can make the argument, like, it's 32nd century tech, her suit can protect her from that. I'm like, I don't buy that. That seems like a really big stretch, but whatever. It's like a 2-second little part of the scene. But again, the ships are also getting severely damaged. Discovery in particular having nothing to do with the tractor beam or anything, so I don't know why it's getting damaged. And my plot issue I had with this part of the scene, this is what I was referring to earlier, is why did she get off? Like, they stopped using the tractor beam, so the warp bubble is no longer at risk of, like, imploding the ship or something. Why didn't she just stay on the ship and continue to destroy their engines until they were forced to stop? I don't get why she's like, okay, they let go of the tractor beam, I will also let go. I'm like, why? Like, you are in a good position here, Michael. Just stay where you're at and, you know, disengage their ship. I don't understand why you had to leave.
While now that you have said this, I'm now thinking there's an even bigger plot hole with this in the first place. Michael Burnham is the one damaging the ship's warp field.
No, that's the tractor beam. They make it pretty clear, I think.
She's shooting the engines to disable the ship.
Oh, so okay, yeah.
She's the one damaging the warp field. But at the same time, have none of these people heard of a photon torpedo?
I mean, probably not when you have your person on the ship.
Well, yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, why not just beam Burnham back to Discovery and then just photon torpedo? It's not like the enemy ships seem to have been... It's not like they were firing weapons back. They were just going. There was no weapons fire at all. They were just leaving. And they made no other attempt to stop them but a tracked beam and Michael Burnham shooting the engines. Like,
Well, you can't shoot a photon torpedo at warp.
yes, you can. That's what they're for.
I thought that only phasers worked at warp.
No, it's the other way around. You can't use phasers at warp
okay.
because their phasers are limited to the speed of light. You use a
okay, I
photon
see.
torpedo because they're capable of warp speed.
That makes sense.
Even though that's not always the way it works.
I mean,
in
to
Star
be
Trek,
fair,
it's
they had like a
principle.
split second after she got off the ship because they made it clear they couldn't beam her back while she was in their warp bubble. So as soon as she got out of the warp bubble and everyone like paused for a moment, they immediately just went back to warp and left. So I can accept like, okay, we didn't have time to shoot a photon torpedo at them in that amount of time,
bet
and we
Captain
couldn't do it while
Rayner
she
would've-
was on the ship. So
Captain Reno, I bet you he was like, should I?
I bet he already pressed the button and it was too late. I did think the decoy warp signatures were a good idea. I'm like, that's actually pretty smart. I don't think I've seen that before either, where a ship actually has a system where it just launches little buoys that are just meant to confuse like where they're going. So I thought that was a clever idea from the writers and from, the antagonist there.
Kamau, so we clearly have a Sung-type android on this planet.
I liked, but I did have a question for you on that. Didn't they establish that Sung only made data? Like data and lore were the only
B4.
two. Well, B4 sucked. That's my point I'm getting at here. Like lore and data were the only two that worked. He tried to do B4 and it just didn't work. Like it never was able to get up to spec basically. But now there's another Sung android who does work and seems to have at least more noticeable emotions than Data ever did. I mean, it's not like a huge thing. I'm probably just nitpicking it, but I was a little confused.
I was under the impression, given what Stamets says after they beam his dead body to the ship, that this has not been built by Data's creator.
Oh, that is right. I forgot. It's there's like an artist's signature to give like tribute to Sung, but it wasn't actually Sung who made
And
this android. That
we
actually
kind
does
of
make more sense.
know from Picard that sort of style of android with the yellow eyes and stuff gets built more. The only thing I think you could say about it is questioning how has it survived for so long at this point.
I mean, it's a good bit
800
of
years.
techno. I mean, they never. In canon, they have never explicitly said, like, oh, Data is going to last this long. He's said he knows he'll last longer than most of his friends and all that. But one day he will eventually degrade and break down. You just don't know when. So I guess this is sort of the canon way of saying, for sure, more than 800 years.
I mean, he looked pretty
I guess.
perfect, didn't he?
I mean, yeah, he seemed like he was doing fine.
On a backwater sand planet.
He did have trouble firing a phaser, though. Hilariously had trouble firing that phaser. Like, he was really struggling. Like, come on, man. Get that thing working.
The Sand Runner scene. Again, another excessive action-heavy scene for the episode. I hated it.
out of the three major action scenes we saw in the first two episodes, it's definitely my least favorite. I don't hate it. There's one part of it that I did hate. I was like, that's stupid. I don't like that. But in general, I'm like, it's kind of a fun action scene to have. Like it feels like Star Wars in a way. Literally feels like the Rise of Skywalker scene. They're on very similar vehicles in the sandy desert. But I think visually they did a good job with the scene. Like, it's obviously a super CGI fest, but it's good CGI, and it looks visually striking, which I appreciated, but I think it just goes on for too long. I'm like, dude, the scene has been going on for like 10 minutes straight. Can we wrap it up? Like, they were going for a long time, and I think the part that we both actually hated was them nosediving two ships into the ground in order to stop the avalanche. That seemed excessive.
Explain what happens here. The bad guys use an avalanche of rock to escape. In order to protect this settlement of thousands of lives, they decide to use both Raynor's ship, because he's there, and to be honest, this avalanche is basically his fault.
Yeah. Which they do call him out on that, at least.
But they decide to use both ships to block the oncoming path of the avalanche, which is a perfectly fine idea. But the method of doing it is to nosedive both ships at speed into the ground and then deploy some sort of shield to stop the avalanche. And it is definitely breaking all sorts of rules of Star Trek. I mean, it's a completely stupid idea to begin with. Like, one of the principal things you don't do with a very big ship, as the people of Baltimore know, is ram a ship into something else, because that tends to cause damage. So ramming 2 starships into the ground of a planet at speed, yes, you can use, it's 32nd century tech this, and it's only some sand that. You rammed 2 large objects into a very large immovable object. That is not a good idea.
Yeah. Again, I think them having the idea of, like, let's combine our shields in order to stop the avalanche, I'm like, that's a good idea. Like, I think that's reasonable. I'm fine with that. It's just the fact that to do that, for some reason, they needed to, like, essentially crash their ships to do it. And even though they spent the opening of the next episode being like, we're here getting repairs for it or whatever, it felt like they got off very, very easy there. I'm like, the front of your ship should be, like, caved in, man. Like, you literally crashed it into the ground. And as you pointed out, the deflector dish is underneath the saucer section pointing forward. So why would you angle your ship directly at the ground away from the avalanche? That doesn't make any sense as to why that would, like, reinforce a shield in front of you. Like, I guess that's nitpicky, but again, it's like...
This is the thing.
It's a silly idea, I think.
It's... The rules of Star Trek are well established over a long period of time. I think we were discussing this when it came to the canon and internal consistency. We know what the point of a deflector dish is. It stops anything hitting the ship when it's at warp, because you don't want even the smallest particle hitting your ship when you're traveling faster than the speed of light. All you would need to do to stop a wave of rock coming towards your town is to just let the deflector do its job. You have 2 starships there. And in the episode, Saru even transfers auxiliary power to the deflector. Boost the deflectors, and they can just sweep the material out of the way. If a deflector is capable of stopping anything hitting the ship at warp speed, an avalanche approaching at a fairly sedate 200 kilometers an hour is probably nothing.
Yeah. Should have been pretty simple to both just get their ships, like, level to the ground and then facing forward and then do it. And you could still have the spectacle, you could still have the big shield stopping all the rocks and sand and everything, just without the added silliness of smashing the ship into the ground, which apparently they also were able to, like, dig themselves out of it, no problem. You don't actually see them do it, but I'm assuming it wasn't an issue because they immediately get back home and start fixing up their ship. So it was just a bit silly for my taste. It seems action on this show is sort of where they get really loose with those rules and, like, logic in a sense. So I agree. That was probably the lowest point of the 2 episodes for me, was seeing that sequence. Because even though it was fun, even though it was visually striking, it was just silly to smash the ships into the ground. I mean, it was already moderately silly to have them have like a speeder chase in the desert, but I was willing to let that go. They've already done it in Nemesis, technically. I know that scene is ripped to pieces by a lot of fans, but I could be fine with it. Like, let me have some fun with my Star Trek. I think we're all allowed to have a little fun, but within reason. This was pushing it just a bit too much for me.
I'll be curious to see if the ships smashing themselves into the ground gets a doubt from, was it Trek Culture, or whoever it is.
Probably
the ups and downs.
not.
we'll watch his opinion of it and we'll see.
I like Trek Culture. They're very, very, very positive over there.
So linking episode 1 and 2 together and coming back to something that was positive. We both really were surprised, and we do kind of like the fact that they're drawing inspiration from that Next Generation episode.
I never thought they would. Never
go
in a
into
million
some
years.
more information about it. Captain Picard gets name dropped at the end as Dr. Kovic explains all the classified information. I admit, on the one hand, I kind of don't like the fact that it was just basically all expositioned to us in that last sort of few minutes of the episode. But like you said, it's nice that we didn't have to wait for multiple episodes for it to get to the point. Like, we have the point here, we know what it is, we know who built the MacGuffin. Let's just, kind of get on with it and go.
Yeah, now that we have that out of the way, it's like, okay, now what do we get to do with that? Like, are we going to meet the progenitors? Are we going to see what this tech does? What are the villain's ultimate plans with this tech? There's so many ways you could apply something like that. Like, it's actually interesting. It's not just like, oh look, a planet was just ripped to shreds. What universe-shattering threat have we come across now? Like, it's still kind of a universe-threatening issue they're dealing with, but finally one that's not just like, big laser or big gravity, whatever, that just destroys stuff. It's like, this is interesting. Like, the villains could have 1,001 different ways they could use this tech. What do they want with it? Actually intrigued me and pulled me in. I was like, you know what? I'm in for the ride. I want to know what they're doing with this tech or what we're going to find at the end of this treasure hunt. So I think they did that well.
Yeah,
I do agree, though, it was very exposition heavy at the end, maybe a little bit too much so, but I mostly forgive it because, thank God, we got to the point. You didn't make me wait 5 episodes to get to this point. We got there. Thank you.
And then episode 2 was a lot slower pace. We got a lot more talking in this between principally Saru and Burnham, because Saru is leaving the ship to go and do his ambassadorial mission, but also to marry his Vulcan sweetheart. Both me and Michael were sat here because the whole episode felt like the cliche of, oh, it's his last mission and he's about to get married and he's going to be promoted, and we were all waiting for him to die in this episode. Mm-hmm.
Which they clearly knew that's what you were going to think. Like, they were obviously setting you up to feel that way, which I thought was pretty good writing. I'm like, wow, you actually got me to worry about this character. Something that Discovery has notoriously had some issues with. So I was happy with that. And that was why that action sequence in that episode was my favorite of the 3, because I genuinely felt tension. I was like, I don't know if Saru's going to make it through this. They've really set this up for him to make a heroic sacrifice or just not be able to make it back to the ship for some reason. And they didn't. And they successfully kept that tension going through that scene, which I genuinely liked. Not to mention, in that scene, as well as the rather silly nosedive the ships into the ground scene, it's not Michael who has come up with the solution as she has many, many times before. Again, I think in season 4 they did a good job not doing that too terribly much, and they seem to be continuing on with, let's let the crew actually problem solve some things and help their captain, rather than the captain just do everything for them. So I really like seeing Tilly and Adira problem solve how to get through this electromagnetic field. I liked seeing who was it that was discussing the shield issue? Was that Stamets and someone else?
So that was Adira again.
But again, it's nice to see other characters actually have a role on the ship. Like, oh, you're here for a reason, rather than you're here just to like fill some spots on the crew. I did genuinely like that even though they still have Michael Burnham at the center of the action, she is not just the perfect hero who comes up with every solution, executes it with no issues. Like, she, for one, struggled in some of those action scenes, which I liked to see. And two, she was not the one coming up with every mastermind solution. She was being a captain. A captain way too much on the front lines, but again, I don't think we're ever going to get our wish fully with that on this show, and I'm willing to accept that. I just like that she got help from her crew. Even though I was telling you I thought it was a little silly that it took them forever to figure out an electromagnetic pulse is the answer to the solution. I was like, seems like that would be the first place your mind would go. It took you guys a long time to get to it. But you make a good point that that's such old tech to them that it probably wouldn't be the first thing their minds go to. So I'm willing to let that one go as well.
And again, a bit of a nitpick, but again, just a sort of a break of Star Trek rules. But also kind of a break on basic military command structure. Both the captain and the first officer of the starship in question beaming down to the planet on their own without support. The two most important officers on board the ship. Like, neither me nor Michael can figure out who is technically in command. Like, if you removed Janeway or Chakotay from Voyager, we know who's in command.
Tuvok.
If we remove Picard and Riker, who's in command?
Data?
Yep.
Is it Worf or is it Data?
Technically it's Data. And if we remove Cisco, well, DS9's a bit weird, but like, if you remove Cisco and Kira, usually it's then Worf.
Yeah, probably would be Worf in that
And if
situation.
you remove Cisco and Worf, it's Kira.
Hmm.
But
Discovery's a little different.
Yeah, neither of us knows who's in command of Discovery as a result of them two leaving the bridge. We think it's probably Uwushikun, but we don't know because, again, Discovery very rarely ever refers to its crew by their rank. So we have no idea of the hierarchy of rank. We're kind of assuming that Uwushikun is in command of the bridge. It would have been nice to see, because
who was on the bridge there?
Yeah, there was that good episode of the Orville where, Seth and the ex-wife go off the ship.
And their security officer takes her
The young
first
security
command.
officer has to take over on her first command, and she makes a bit of a hash of it, and she has to learn how to do it. I kind of feel there was the opportunity here to have some character growth of, Uwushikun or whoever it is who's next in command having to take over the ship and maybe handling the difficulties of oh my god, there's like drones attacking them and shit, and what are we going to do, and blah blah blah. But that didn't happen. And I think that was a missed opportunity for some character growth for a different member of the crew.
I agree. I do think that's slightly nitpicky, just because, again, it's not like it was necessary to see who was in charge of the ship there. Like, the way the story played out, the people on the bridge weren't really required for anything there. So it's not like, oh, it was so dumb that they didn't show what was going on there. It's just, I agree, it's slight missed opportunity. Like, could have taken a moment to give Uwushikun or Reese, like, a moment to shine, but whatever. We still have more of the season to go. There's always a chance to do it a little later. Or not at all. We'll see.
We both thought that the obvious solution to Saru leaving the ship was Booker was going to become the new first officer. That's, Saru even suggests that. And then we kind of get the curveball that Michael asks the slightly disgraced force into retirement ex-captain Rayner to be her first officer instead. Now, Rayner is very much a bit of a loose cannon,
very militant,
quite militant, a lot older than Michael is. I mean, he says he's been doing Red Directive missions for 30 years.
And this is his 7th one, I think they said. I see potential in this matchup, though.
I do as well.
Like what they could have done with Chakotay and Janeway, where it's like, ooh, really different leadership styles. This could really clash and come up in some interesting ways where they each find each other's weaknesses and strengths and everything. So I'm hoping they really go into that.
Yeah, so I see similar setup here with Rayna and Burnham that DS9 kind of had with Kira and Cisco. Cisco being the Michael Burnham, very straight-faced, pro-fed, very by the book sort of. When I say by the book, more by the book, yeah. And Rayna here obviously being a bit like Kira, very eager to rush in, very militant, very aggressive. So if they take advantage of that, like DS9 did with Kira and Cisco, to find a sort of middle ground working relationship, I think it would be very good.
I agree. I see a lot of potential in it. Again, I feel like it's not like a huge surprise. As soon as she's talking to the Admiral, you're like, oh, she's going to bring him in as number 1 instead. But even still, I wasn't expecting that until that moment. Then I was like, oh, interesting. Okay, let's see what we do with this. I feel like a lot of these first 2 episodes is very solid setup where I'm actually pretty excited to see the rest of it. I want to see how this plays out. The action scenes give me pause just because, again, there's a lot of like silliness in it, a lot of stuff that doesn't really make any logical sense if you actually think about it, but it could just be one of those things where it's like, okay, if we have an action scene, just strap your excitement hat on and just go with the ride, and the rest of it is really good, which I can be okay with that. I don't know if it's true or not. It's probably not, but it felt like there was less action in these 2 episodes than like normal Discovery. Again, I'm probably wrong on that, but it felt a little bit less in your face with it. Like when they were there, it was very in your face, but
It probably feels that way because both these episodes had quite a lot of slower talking moments between people.
Yeah, which this show, it's not like it was missing that. Like the show has always had deep discussions with characters and everything in many of the seasons. Here it just feels...
They felt more natural.
Yeah, it felt more real. It felt like, okay, these are actually people talking to each other, and they have, there's certain hang-ups or certain ways they feel about each other, but they are a family, they are a crew here. Whereas in the previous seasons, almost any dialogue was pretty much just to see how much 2 people hated each other, and you're just like, okay, I get it. Like everyone in this whole universe hates each other. Here it was a lot more nuanced, and it seemed like they did spend a good amount of time actually going into some of these relationships. Even though it's kind of treading similar water to the last season, I enjoyed the conflict between Michael and Booker, how like they're okay being in each other's presence and everything, but things are weird. Like he betrayed her, he betrayed the whole Federation in the last season, and that is a hang up for the both of them. I still can't get over his line to her though, where he says, we both did stuff to each other. I'm like, what in the hell did she do to you? Like, she literally didn't do anything to you. She went to bat for you. She literally brought you back to life, dude. Like, she didn't do anything wrong to you. You were the only one who betrayed her. But whatever.
And yeah, I mean, I'm more positive about how this season has started than I probably have about the start of any of Discovery's seasons at this point.
Agreed.
Which kind of makes me a little sad because, again, like I said to you earlier, like I feel like if Discovery had just started in the 32nd century and not tried to muddle the canon and rewrite the past with their first 2 seasons, then I probably would feel more positive about the show overall.
I agree. I mean,
But because
more
of
than
all,
ever, it feels that way.
Of all the crap and all the mistakes they previously made, like, yes, most Star Trek shows take a season or two to get going, but here, this feels like an actual proper start of a decent Star Trek season, and it's 5 seasons in.
I mean, I didn't hate the season 4 premiere. I wasn't as jazzed about it because, again, it ends with like, oh, a whole planet exploded. What could it be? And then they do the huge zoom out to show like the eye-looking thing that covers like a whole galaxies and stuff. And I was like, that's a bit much, but all right, whatever. And I did eventually like the reveal of that species because it was actually kind of unique and kind of cool. But this is definitely the strongest premiere probably out of every season. After rewatching season 1, I'm actually a little surprised at myself how much I did like rewatching it. I still had plenty of issues because I really dislike what they did with the Klingons. But there was a lot in that very, very first 2-episode premiere where I was like, this is actually not bad. I don't hate this. But this is, I think, by far the best of the premieres, where I feel the most confident about the story ahead here. I'm genuinely interested in finding out what's going on with the progenitors and their tech. What do the villains want to use this tech for? What is the relationship between Booker and Mal supposed to end up being? Like, there's actually some stuff here where I can sink my teeth into it and get excited for that next episode. Which
they've just got to keep on.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, like they've got to, given that they have, not, I would say not won me over, but given that I am not frowning at them over these 2 episodes that much, they can only ruin it at this point. They can only make me dislike them again. At the moment, I'm like, okay, you've got a decent start here. You guys could leave me my final thoughts on Discovery being, season 5 was okay. They've just got to keep the momentum going and
just keep it up.
They've got 8 episodes now to do that with. So
4 of which surely have to be them getting, another piece to their puzzle map. Like, they very clearly established we got 4 pieces left. We took this whole second episode to get the first piece, so I'm assuming 4 more episodes are each going to be devoted to them going to these places and getting another piece to the puzzle. Which leaves 4 more after that to do whatever the hell's gonna happen, and that is where the show, I think, will either be made or broken. Once you do finally get to the villain's reasoning behind this, what they're going to do with the tech, what is the overall threat at play, once they've established those things, it could go radically in either direction. So I'm nervous, but these first 2 episodes did give me hope that seems like they're on a good track here. I think they could end this show on a high note, which I really do want that. Like, for all the hate that this show has gotten, from myself included, I would love for it to end on at least a decent note where I don't hear the name Discovery and think, ugh, that stupid show that just ruined it for me. Like, I would like for it to end well, and like I said, these first 2 episodes have me hopeful that they can actually do it.
Yeah, and I was very pleasantly surprised that, I'm feeling relatively okay with how it's gone so far. If you
just don't like the ships crashing into the planet.
No, just don't ram ships into things. Let us know down in the comments if you've watched the first 2 episodes and what you made of them, and what you think about the reveal of the progenitors and the premise for this whole episode. Me and Michael will be reviewing each episode when they come out, so if you want to hear our thoughts on the rest of the season, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and look out for those. But until next time, it is goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.